What's good, YouTube? I'm back today because I uploaded a video yesterday about like troubles with PTSD and anxiety and sort of what that means for me. And then I had therapy. So like a lot of things have changed. So yesterday I talked about sort of PTSD, and I didn't really go into a lot of it, but I talked about complex PTSD, which is something that I'm like more recently becoming aware of. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a psychiatric illness that is typically caused by severe trauma of sort of in a single event or a short time of events. So that's typically like natural disaster or like death, or a lot of soldiers experience that. Complex PTSD, so complex post-traumatic stress disorder, typically happens over a longer period of time, the trauma that is. And it's also a psychiatric illness, but it's from trauma that, like, again, happened over a period, like a long span of time. So that's typically like childhood trauma specifically. This was something that like I wasn't like greatly aware of the differences. Again, like I think I've explored my PTSD not nearly enough. I did a lot of it in like high school, and I went into like a partial hospitalization program towards the end of my time in high school, and it obviously really helped then. There was a lot of things that like I didn't even realize that my brain was doing and that I was doing self-consciously, and that like I actually felt, and that like so many things from like my childhood growing up I just like was able to realize, and I think that the realization of those things kind of helped me like cope with it a little bit more. So like I was like, okay, I know why I have these feelings. I know why I have like sort of these like inhibitions and flashbacks, and like why I'm afraid to like make connections. Like I understand like why I'm doing all of this. So now I can make it better. It wasn't until yesterday that I made like I think a profound connection towards like how I'm still very much so not. Like I'm obviously better, but still so far away from being better. And that I think goes into talking more about like whether or not I have PTSD or complex PTSD. So in my last video, again, I talked a lot about like these feelings, the PTSD I started to notice, and my doctor started to notice at the end of high school, right after I had just like lost 3 crucial relationships. I had like severed all ties with my father, my mother died, and then like my best friend died. So like that kind of being like the trigger into it. And I'm not sure if that was like PTSD from those deaths, like isolated, like if I could have PTSD from that, and then from like all the stuff and like shit that happened in my childhood. In my mind, when everyone started dying, or like when I started losing those relationships, it's not funny, I just like laugh when I'm uncomfortable. When I started losing those relationships, I basically felt like the fear that everyone was going to leave me. I felt it excruciating. I felt like life was over. I felt like I was always going to be alone. I was super depressed. And things would just like trigger me all the time. Like when people would cancel plans on me, I would be like, oh, this person is leaving, like abandoned ship, blah, blah, blah. And it would happen to the point where like my friends were like, yo, what the fuck is wrong with you? And it was stuff that like I seriously felt. It was the worst feeling ever. More importantly though, now I've realized that it's a lot more than that. So like I still have all of those feelings, but I'm sort of much better at working with them, and I really do attribute that to the partial program. But now it's also, I'm realizing that like as a child, I always felt like I was a burden on friends, family, just like to life. I felt like a lot of times growing up, I told my therapist over and over again, you know, sometimes I wish I wasn't alive. Sometimes I wish I just wasn't born, and I feel like life would be so much better than that. Wow, I like completely, I'm saying this now, and I completely forgot I used to say that like all the time. Shaking. Yeah, that was like really sad. Yeah, I used to say that like I remember being 5 and 6, and it was mainly because my parents were going through a custody battle. My mom's, like, to simplify it, my mom's side and my dad's side just like were not agreeing, and I was sort of like in the middle. And it was basically like, you know, if you go live with your mom, then you like hate your dad's side. You go live with your dad, you hate your mom's side. And like obviously like both sides kind of perpetuated that idea, but not really. I think a lot of that came from within as well, and for like a host of different reasons. Like I can go into like all of the examples and like all of the bullshit that like made me feel like a burden, but essentially is that like I just felt like growing up, um, I didn't really have no one necessarily needed me, if that makes sense. Like I lived with my aunt and uncle. So like one, I already wasn't like their biological like child. So that felt awkward. A lot of my family, like I had my dad's side of the family and I did have my mom's side of the family, but a big part of it is that like my life has always been revolving around extended family. And I think because in my early childhood, when I was like popped around a lot, I never really got to feel like, all right, this is like permanent. Even though I stayed with my aunt and uncle for years, it always just felt like that could be ripped underneath. That, along with, again, like feeling like a burden, like feeling like if I was never born, my parents would never fight. They never would have spent all the money in court. They wouldn't like be having like, those problems. They wouldn't be having like, I would just, like a lot of their problems would just go away. And I honestly still believe that now that I'm thinking about it. Like rationally, like, I'm happy I was born, but like, yeah, it's just like I don't know. And I think these are feelings that I just didn't realize that I still feel. I feel it and not wanting to be a burden to others at all. And it's in the simplest shit, and it's annoying. Like in emails, at work, I don't want to feel like a burden, so I don't want to ask questions, and I have anxiety about asking questions. I have anxiety about making sure my work is right, so that like they're not like, oh, this dumb fucker like is just fucking everything up, and we hate him. That matters a lot to me, like a lot more than it should. I feel like a burden. I don't want to disappoint people ever. And that just happens when I receive phone calls. That happens in my relationships. That happens when I'm texting. I have to make sure that like I text something back correctly. It has to be like the best response because I'm afraid of the response that like someone else will give me. I think that like I think a lot about how my actions towards others because I don't want that other person to respond negatively. Um, and it leaves me in a state of fear, like all the time. And I've been talking about that as feeling anxiety. And maybe partially it is anxiety, but I think that like deep down, it's the feeling of like I don't want to burden anybody in my life, regardless if that's like I won't call freaking AT&T to set up a bill because like I'm afraid that like I don't want to bother them. And that's their job. And like it's a real fear. And like I can even feel my heart racing now. My body tenses up and it's more intense than other times. Yeah, that's sort of what I realized. And I know that's like kind of jumbled and there's so much more in it. But like I think that's sort of the next part I need to like work on. And I think that's why medication really hasn't been working is because I really haven't thought about those feelings in so long. I even forgot that like I even had those feelings as a kid and that like most of my childhood I felt like I just didn't want to be alive. Not like I wanted to kill myself, but like as a very young child being like, you know what, I seem like to be the problem in this equation. Let's just remove the problem. And I feel that way now in my life. I don't think about it at all, ever. But like at the like crux of everything, I'm realizing that like, oh, this is why I have anxiety about almost everything. Relationships, I'm afraid of being a burden. Like work, I'm afraid of being a burden. Like freaking customer service, being out in the world, I'm afraid of being a burden on the world. And some days it's like less intense. Other days it's a lot more intense. Some days it leaves me, literally paralyzed and I can't move. I'm having a panic attack and I'm like dying. That doesn't really happen as much anymore, thank God. But now that I'm off of lithium, it's been happening, like it's becoming more and more intense and I'm just like, what is going on? I'm gonna start dealing with this. And I just think it's important to talk more about it. I think I'm afraid of talking about it because it's like less about, like, oh, the medication, like, bipolar disorder to me, it's a chemical imbalance. It's like, yes, it's part of me, blah, 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 but like, I can't help it. I can't help this either, but it's about stuff that like happened to me and less about just like chemicals in my brain. It's like, these are how I'm feeling and it just feels very vulnerable. But I think, we just have to work through these issues. I think that's like what it means to become healthy, even though we don't want to. And we have to talk about it. And I think that like, yeah, I'm rambling. All right, y'all. I hope y'all have an amazing weekend and or whatever. You can be watching this video whenever. So yeah, remember, like, share, comment, and subscribe, and set up those notifications for videos to find out when I'm uploading new videos. You guys are awesome and amazing. I'll see y'all later. Peace.